I'm going to read you a post. Not summarizing it, I am going to read it to you, word for word. Because every single headline about this took one line out of it, slapped it in bold letters, and threw the rest away. And the rest? The rest is where the actual story is. Listen to the whole thing. Hear it straight through, and then decide for yourself whether the headlines were actually fair. This isn't about defending anyone, and it isn't about jumping on a bandwagon. This is about looking at what was actually said versus what the internet claims was said. Recently, the noise around Maddie Brush has reached an absolute fever pitch. Social media has been flooding with these exclusive theories and supposed deep dives, trying to piece together exactly why she broke her silence and who she was really targeting. They spin it, they twist it, and they try to feed you a narrative that gets them the most clicks. We are going to look past all of that noise today. We are going back to the source, armed with some recent updates that change everything. But before we dive into the exact text that broke the internet, if you want the real story without the fluff, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Sister Wives Crew right now. We dig deep into the details everyone else misses. So join the crew and turn on those notifications so you never miss a breakdown. Let's get straight into it. Here is the first part of what Maddie wrote. Just listen to the weight of these words. It is a heavy thing to realize that the person who is supposed to protect you is the one you need protection from. For years, I kept quiet. I kept the peace because that is what we were taught to do. We were taught that silence is the glue that holds a broken family together. But holding it together for someone else meant tearing myself apart. I have watched the narrative shift. I have watched people who weren't there speak as if they lived it. And I have watched the truth get buried under a mountain of carefully crafted PR. I am not doing it anymore. This isn't out of spite. It is out of survival. Think about that for a second. Who is that line addressed to? Who is she actually talking about when she says the person who is supposed to protect you? Social media and exclusive theories immediately pointed the finger in one very obvious direction. Everyone assumed they knew exactly who this was about. They saw the words broken family and immediately dragged Kody into the center of the frame. And maybe they are right. Maybe it is exactly that simple. But when you look at the recent updates, when you look at the shifting dynamics between Maddie, her siblings, and the remaining parents, you have to ask yourself if that line is actually a multi-layered message. Who is that line addressed to? We are going to come back to that, because the answer isn't just a name. It is an entire turning point in her life. And it might not be the person you are picturing in your head right now. But before we uncover who that was really meant for, I want you to pause on your own life for a second. Have you ever written something about a parent or a family member that you almost didn't post? You typed it out, your heart was racing, and you just hovered over the send button. Almost. That feeling, the finger hovering over the screen, paralyzed by the guilt of speaking your truth versus the fear of the fallout. Do you know it? If yes, just type yes down in the comments right now. Just the word yes. Because if you know that feeling, you will understand the second half of this post in a way most people simply won't. You will understand what it actually took for her to finally press send. Let's talk about the pressure cooker that is living your formative years on television. For Maddie, growing up wasn't just about dealing with typical teenage angst or normal family disagreements. Every argument, every move, every shift in faith or family dynamic was broadcast for millions to dissect. When you are raised in that environment, you learn very quickly how to speak in code. You learn how to say things that appease the cameras, while hiding the reality of what happens when the crew packs up and leaves. So when someone like Maddie, who has generally been very calculated and measured in her public statements, suddenly drops a message this raw, and you have to pay attention to the timing. The exclusive theories floating around social media right now suggest that something massive happened behind the scenes just days before she wrote this. We aren't talking about a standard family disagreement. We are talking about a fundamental breach of trust. A moment where the mask slipped completely. Some of these recent updates claim that Maddie had a private conversation that completely shattered her remaining illusions. She realized that the silence she was keeping wasn't protecting her siblings or her mother. It was only protecting the person who was causing the pain. It's fascinating how the media works, isn't it? They take a paragraph filled with years of repressed emotion and they carve it up like a turkey. They take the one sentence that sounds the most scandalous, they plaster it on a thumbnail, and they completely ignore the pain that surrounds it. That is why we are here. That is why on Sister Wives Crew, we don't just read the headlines, we read the fine print. Because the fine print is where Maddie is actually speaking to us. In that first section we just went through, she uses the word survival. That isn't a word you throw around lightly. You don't use the word survival when you are just annoyed that someone missed your birthday. You use that word when your emotional well-being has been pushed to the absolute brink. When you feel like if you don't speak up, you might actually lose your grip on who you are. So keep that question in the back of your mind. Who is the protector that became the threat? The comment sections on social media were immediately divided the second this dropped. You had the loyalists who have watched this family since day one, analyzing every single word, trying to match it up with episodes from seasons ago. Then you had the casual viewers who just saw the drama and wanted a quick fix. But both sides missed the nuance. Both sides were so busy arguing over who was right and who was wrong that they didn't stop to ask why now. Why did Maddie, who has spent the last few years building her own life, focusing on her own children and distancing herself from the toxic circus, suddenly decide to wade back into the mud? There are exclusive theories out there that point to a financial dispute, while others lean heavily into a deeply personal betrayal involving one of her younger siblings. The recent updates sweeping through the Sister Wives community suggest that Maddie didn't write this for herself at all. They suggest she went first so that someone else wouldn't have to. She took the heat because she knew she could handle it. She threw herself on the grenade to shield someone more vulnerable. And if that is true, it completely changes how you have to read every single word she wrote. It changes the context from an angry daughter lashing out to a fierce protector standing her ground. Let us pick up exactly where we left off, looking at Maddie not just as a daughter, but as a shield for someone else. When you view her words through that lens, the entire narrative shifts. And that brings us to the middle section of her post. This is the part that no headline used. This is the section that was completely ignored by the mainstream blogs and the gossip sites because it doesn't fit into a neat, easily monetized box. The tone changes here dramatically. It stops being about survival and starts becoming something entirely different. Listen to this. You cannot build a kingdom on the backs of the children who trusted you, and then act surprised when those same children eventually stop holding up the walls. We have all grown up. We have our own children now. And looking at my kids, I finally realized that love is not supposed to be a test of loyalty. I am not writing this to punish anyone, and I am not writing this to get even. I am putting this out there because the silence has to end, so the healing can begin. You don't get to demand respect while actively rewriting history to make yourself the victim. I am drawing a line in the sand today, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Do not cross it. Do not try to spin this. Just leave us alone to heal. I want you to really process that paragraph. The tone is entirely different from the beginning. It is less frantic, less cornered, and much more grounded. But it brings up a massive question. And this is where I need you to really engage your critical thinking. Is this an accusation? Or is it a request? Think about that deeply. Is she pointing a finger? Or is she putting up a wall? Because the answer to that question completely alters how we understand the current dynamic of this family. Social media and exclusive theories immediately labeled this as a vicious attack. They called it a takedown. They painted Maddie as the aggressive party who finally snapped and went on the offensive. They scoured the recent updates, looking for any clue to prove that she was out for blood. But when you look at the actual words, when you strip away the background noise of 15 seasons of reality television drama, you have to ask yourself if we have all been misinterpreting her intentions from the very start. Is this an accusation or a request? We are going to answer that. But to fully understand the answer, we have to look at how this message was actually received by the world. Let us go back to July 17th, 2026. This was the day her post officially became a headline. It was the day the media machine got its hands on her raw emotion and fed it into the algorithm. If you were on social media on July 17th, 2026, you remember the absolute chaos. Every single feed, every single recommended video, every single blog post was dominated by one narrative. I want to put the biggest headline from that day side by side with the original text, because the contrast is absolutely sickening. The headline read, "Maddie Brush destroys family in brutal takedown, demands total isolation." That is what millions of people read. That is what millions of people believed. But let us look at the actual text again. I am drawing a line in the sand today, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Just leave us alone to heal. Does that sound like a brutal takedown to you? Does that sound like someone demanding total isolation out of spite? Or does it sound like a mother who is exhausted, who is looking at her own children and realizing that she has to break a generational curse? The media took the phrase, "leave us alone," and twisted it into a weapon. They turned a boundary into an act of warfare. This is what happens when real human pain intersects with audience retention. The media knows that you are more likely to click on a story about a brutal takedown than a story about a woman quietly establishing healthy boundaries. They understand the psychology of the reality show audience perfectly. We have been conditioned to expect drama, betrayal, and explosive confrontations, because that is what the show has fed us for over a decade. So when real life happens, when genuine trauma surfaces, the media packages it in the exact same way they package a season finale. But you and I both know that real life does not operate on a production schedule. The exclusive theories that exploded after July 17th, 2026, fed right into this artificial drama. People were making entire videos dissecting her use of the word kingdom, connecting it to ancient religious texts, tying it to Kody's specific phrasing from seasons filmed 10 years ago, and building these massive, convoluted conspiracies. They treated her pain like it was an Easter egg in a movie. They treated her life like it was a puzzle meant to be solved by strangers on the internet. And amid all of that noise, the actual point of her message was completely lost. Let's look at the phrase, "love is not supposed to be a test of loyalty." If you have watched this family for any length of time, you know that loyalty has always been the ultimate currency. It was the metric by which love was measured. If you agreed, if you complied, if you kept quiet, you were loyal, and therefore you were loved. If you questioned, if you stepped out of line, if you advocated for yourself, you were disloyal and you were cast out. Maddie has lived her entire life under that system. She watched her mothers navigate it. She watched her siblings suffer under it, and for a long time, she played the game herself. So when she says that love is not a test of loyalty, she is dismantling the entire foundation of her upbringing in one single sentence. The recent updates we have been getting about the internal family dynamics show that this exact sentiment is spreading among the siblings. There is a quiet revolution happening away from the cameras. They are realizing that they do not have to perform for affection. They are realizing that they are allowed to have boundaries without feeling guilty. This brings us right back to our question. Is this an accusation or a request? Let us finally put this to bed. When you look at the full context, when you ignore the July 17th headlines and read the actual words, the answer becomes painfully clear. It is not an accusation. An accusation requires a desire to argue. An accusation is an invitation to engage in a fight. Maddie is not trying to fight anymore. She is exhausted. She is done. This is a request. More than that, it is a desperate plea disguised as a boundary. When she says, "you cannot build a kingdom on the backs of the children," she isn't trying to tear the kingdom down. She is just telling them that she is no longer willing to carry the weight of it. She is stepping out from underneath the falling debris and asking not to be pulled back in. She is saying, "I see what this is. I see what it has done to me. I see what it is doing to my siblings, and I am formally requesting to be left out of the narrative." Social media and exclusive theories want it to be an accusation, because an accusation means the story continues. An accusation means there will be a rebuttal, and a counter-rebuttal, and more content to consume. But a request for peace? A boundary? That signifies the end of the drama. And the media hates endings. They want the wound to stay open forever so they can keep charging admission to look at it. But Maddie is closing the wound. She is opting out of the spectacle. And that realization makes the first part of her post even more complicated. If the middle section is a request for peace, if it is a boundary being set to protect her own children from a cycle of toxic loyalty, then who was she originally addressing when she talked about the person who was supposed to protect her? If she isn't trying to fight, why open with such a heavy, emotionally devastating statement? The internet assumed they knew the answer immediately. They took the easy route, but the easy route is almost never the truth when it comes to this family. We have established that she is setting a boundary, And we have established that she is doing it not just for herself, but to protect those coming up behind her. We have seen how the media manipulated her words on July 17, 2026, to make her look like the aggressor. Now we have to look at the history, because to truly understand who she was talking about in that opening line, we have to go back to a moment before the boundary was set. We have to look at her consistency. Let us go back to April 5th, 2026. This was months before the explosive July headline, months before the internet tore her words apart and spun them into a million different directions. On April 5th, 2026, Maddie made a much quieter statement. She shared a reflection on her personal page about motherhood, about what it actually takes to raise children in a peaceful home, and the silent burdens we carry from our own childhoods. At the time, social media and exclusive theories barely paid attention to it. It didn't have the venom or the blatant drama that the blogs crave, so it slipped right under the radar. But if you look at that April 5th message now, with the context of everything that has happened since, you see that the tone was already exactly there. She wrote about the heavy burden of being a peacekeeper, and how she absolutely refuses to pass that burden onto her own children. She was already testing the waters. She was already realizing that the environment she was raised in was fundamentally flawed. This consistency check is crucial because it completely destroys the mainstream narrative that her July post was a sudden, irrational snap. The media wants you to believe she just woke up one day, got angry, lost her temper, and fired off a brutal takedown. But the reality, backed by these recent updates and her own digital footprint, is that this was a slow, agonizing realization. She spent months, maybe years, untangling the complicated web of her childhood. The April 5th post proves that her July message wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It was a carefully considered, long overdue resolution. So now we have to face the most uncomfortable part of this entire situation. We have to finally answer the question we asked at the very beginning. Who was that opening line actually addressed to? It is a heavy thing to realize that the person who is supposed to protect you is the one you need protection from. Every single person reading assumed it was about the patriarch. Every single blog pointed the finger straight at Kody Brown. And yes, obviously, a massive portion of that pain originates with him. But look at the exact next sentence she wrote. We were taught that silence is the glue that holds a broken family together. Who taught her that? Who are the traditional peacekeepers in that family structure? Who were the ones constantly asking the children to compromise their own feelings, to keep sweet, to stay quiet so the family wouldn't completely fracture on national television? The uncomfortable truth, the answer that no one on social media and exclusive theories wants to admit, is that she is also talking about the mothers. When you realize that, the entire post takes on a tragic, suffocating new weight. It is incredibly easy for the audience to vilify Kody. That is practically a sport at this point. But it is deeply uncomfortable to acknowledge that the mothers, the women who the audience has rooted for and empathized with for over a decade, were also complicit in the damage. They were the ones who enforced the silence. In their desperate attempt to survive their own toxic marriage and keep the show afloat, they inadvertently asked their children to absorb the collateral damage. When Maddie says the person who is supposed to protect you is the one you need protection from, she is talking about the adults who watched the sinking ship and told the kids to just keep bailing water instead of putting them on a lifeboat. It is a devastating indictment of the entire family structure, not just one man. It is the heartbreaking realization that the adults who were supposed to shield her from the dysfunction were actually the ones holding her inside of it. And this is exactly why we are looking at the bigger picture today. This is exactly why the children have started speaking out at roughly the very same time. Have you noticed that? It isn't just Maddie. Over the last year, we have seen a synchronized awakening among the older siblings. They are all dropping hints, giving unvarnished interviews, and setting boundaries almost simultaneously. The recent updates sweeping through the fandom show a unified front that we have simply never seen before. But why now? Why not 5 years ago? Or 5 years from now? Look at their ages, and look at their own families. They are all reaching the exact stage of adulthood where their own children are the very same ages they were when the cameras first arrived in their living rooms. They are looking at their toddlers and their elementary school-aged kids, and they are experiencing a profound, visceral reaction. They are looking at their own babies and thinking, I could never do to you what was done to me. They are looking at their own fierce, protective instincts and realizing that those instincts were utterly absent in the collective adults who raised them. When you become a parent, you suddenly understand what you deserved as a child. Maddie went first. She was the one willing to take the initial wave of backlash, the one willing to let her raw words be twisted and mutilated by the media on July 17th. She threw herself into the line of fire so that her siblings could see that the sky wouldn't fall if they finally told the truth. She broke the silence so that the rest of them could finally exhale. She proved that you can survive the wrath of the reality TV machine and come out the other side with your peace intact. The media tried to turn her into a villain because villains generate revenue. But when you read the whole post, when you do not summarize it, when you do not cherry-pick the loudest sentence for a clickbait thumbnail, you see a completely different story. You see a woman who is breaking a generational curse in real time. You see a mother choosing her children's future over her parents' past. She isn't destroying a family. She is refusing to let a broken system destroy her. And that is a story worth telling. That is a story worth defending against all of the noise. 2 camps in this comment section tonight. Camp 1, she said too much. Camp 2, she said it too late. Pick your camp and say which, 1 or 2. I want to see the split. And honestly, I think it's closer than either side expects.